back. Thank you for joining us for this next session. With us is Phill Lord David to talk about all things product in learning and development and how a product mindset can improve our ways of working. Um, just to say, we do have on the platform our networking area, so please do make use of that across the last day of the event. And all of the recordings from yesterday are going live on YouTube at the moment. They've taken a little longer than usual just due to some tech problems, but they are almost all there. Without further ado, though, I will shut up and get out of the way and hand you over to Phill. The stage is yours.
Awesome. Cheers, Tom. Um, cool. So I guess if I set the scene a little bit about how this kind of talk came about, and what's really good to see actually is over the last couple of days, a lot of people have kind of been talking about kind of things related to product mindsets. We've had people talking about like learning as a product and the 5 whys for deeper meaning. And really, what I wanted to bring to the table was not necessarily kind of shake things up and say this is the right way to do it, but kind of build on either techniques that you currently use. You'll find that some of these techniques are very similar to other things that you're already doing, TNAs and that sort of stuff. So, really, I just want you to take a different industry's approach on this and see what we can steal and add in. So, bit of background because it's probably a bit strange having a product manager talk at an L&D event. So a bit of background about me. So I've been working in L&D for the last 13 years. Started off, of course, as a face-to-face trainer, down in kind of the weeds of facilitation, and then moved through various roles like strategy, digital implementation, learning design, and then head of learning. And then I shifted across into product because I saw that there was a lot of correlations between the skill sets in L&D, and I wanted to move into more of the kind of the tech side of stuff, which is where the product management side comes in. So why I've picked this is, like I said, there's a lot of correlations between product management and the world of product and L&D. And really, I just wanted to bring to the front some of the stuff that I wish I knew then that I do now, that I think really would have helped me avoid some of the mistakes that I made early in my career in L&D, and equally some of the how we would have overcome some of the challenges that I faced at the time as well. So I wanted to start off by bring to the front some common challenges. Basically, these are shared product diseases. I've completely stolen this concept from a book called Radical Product Thinking. It's a brilliant book. I'd highly recommend reading that. Um, but the reason I want to bring these through is that it's the first time I ever read something that really managed to visualize and just pinpoint exactly some of the challenges that we faced. And I was reading this and I was literally looking at both worlds, my product world and then L&D past, and going, this is exactly the same challenges. So let's bring some of those to the front. Some of these will probably, you'll have a little chuckle at yourself about. And then we're going to look at how we can actually overcome these and solve these by using a product mindset. So disease number one is hero syndrome. So the definition of this is it strikes when we focus on external recognition instead of creating the change that we want to see. Now, in an L&D concept space, that basically means that we're trying to please all stakeholders all the time, and everything is a priority. There's constant putting out of fires all over the place. It looks like using vanity metrics rather than ones that matter. And what I mean by that is being forced to kind of use metrics that maybe are things like engagement in content, or completion rates to try and show success rather than the hard and the harder to find metrics as well, like the business metrics and the ROI and money that you've saved. And it's worried that if you say no to a stakeholder, that it's going to break that relationship, that it's going to break trust in the L&D, and they're going to be like, well, I'm not going to go back to them because they weren't able to help this time. So it's forever saying yes. The next one is obsessive sales or stakeholder disorder. And this is when we focus too much on the short term and not enough on the long term vision and giving that the attention it needs. In the L&D space, what this looks like is little or no strategic direction. and mostly dealing with things like the training requests that are just coming in ad hoc or continuously just focus on onboarding. I've definitely been in that trap where 90% of my team's time was just spent onboarding and constant churn. And that churn, we never got to solve the problem of why people were actually leaving the business. Little or no L&D vision. So where are we actually wanting to head to? Where are we now, and where do we want to get to? And by that, I don't mean that to have a learning culture. There's a deeper bit, and we're going to drill down into that as well in a second. And constant change in delivery plans. This is certainly a pain point I felt in the past, where I used to manage the schedule of all the trainers and all the designers, and it was this monster spreadsheet with all 10 resource, and every week it would change because a new request would come in, priority would change, and would have to jump ship. Strategic swelling. And this is falling into the trap of basically building a wide range of capability, but lacking focus and lacking deeper meaning. And what this looks like is lots of content out there, single programs to try and solve multiple audiences, stretching your presence too soon or too often. So trying to help too many people around the business, which isn't a bad thing, because of course a lot of L&Ds have to support the entire business. But it's where can you add your focus rather than trying to help all people all the time? And a lack of constant reviewing of solutions and the impact that you're having on the business. Two more to go. We've got locked in syndrome. So this is the presence of being too attached to the tech, the processes, or holding on to set solutions. And what that looks like is picking an authoring tool just because it's what you've already used before, or it's what you're comfortable with, being biased about your own solutions and ideas and what will work, and locking in a 12-month strategy or deliverables. Similar thing to what I just mentioned is that's going to change weekly. So we'll look at how we can overcome that as well. And then the final one is pivotitis, getting dizzy from constantly changing directions and focus. And what this looks like is never solving the larger and more complex problems in the business. Changing approach too often too soon because you're not seeing the change maybe that you wanted to see as quickly, or everything being a high priority. So now that I've kind of made everything doom and gloom, there's a reason I want to bring these to the table. And like I said, these are probably common challenges that you face day to day. And from here, what we're going to look at is how a product mindset can help solve some of these challenges, and also some techniques that you can do along the way to help solve that as well. By the way, if there are any questions at any point, dump them into the chat. I'm happy to answer those as we go, or feel free to save those at the end as well. So, what is a product mindset? Is it just a buzzword? Kind of, it's a philosophy, really. To put it simply, a product mindset is a holistic approach of delivering solution that continuously adds value. It's looking at data for insights, and along the lines delivering a good customer experience as well. Customers in L&D obviously being employees, your learners. And the key thing as well here to really call out is about outcomes and not output. And what I mean by that is your solution would be the output. So the course itself, the redesigning of an onboarding course, the implementation of a new platform, that's the output. The outcome is what are you trying to achieve by that? What is the change that you are wanting to see in the world? And that's where we need to be focusing on, because what that does is it gives us an unbiased view of how to solve it. And looking at some of these other keywords, holistic approach, that's about having a good vision. Where are we now? Where do we want to get to? And continuous value. Value is one that we're really going to focus in on here, because what is value? How do you find it? And that sort of stuff. But continuously doing that. I've certainly fallen into the trap of where you're in a project, and L&D often get a bad rap for this, whereby we spend too long on solutions. 6-9 month projects with no deliverables until we finally go live. Then we start rolling it out. The business wants to see results, and we're like, well, you've got to give it time. And before you know it, 12 to 18 months of then analyzing data, you're either only moved it slightly or not at all. So how do we do this stuff quicker? How do we add value and continuous value while still working towards the end goal, but still dealing with the day to day? Because strategies can be a dangerous thing. Life carries on. You need to deal with the fires that are burning here and now, but how do you do that without being detrimental to the long-term plans as well? So there's three questions that we need to ask at this point. How do you add value? What do you know will add value? How do you know what will add value? And how do you decide what the priority order is of delivering those solutions? Well, that is a challenge in itself, which could be a whole webinar, but I'm going to give a few techniques on those. These are the three questions that I really want to drill into. So first of all, how do you add value? Now, what I've done as well is down the bottom, I have added the product diseases that this will help solve as well, just to link that back to some of those challenges that we spoke about. Like I said, I didn't want to just bring doom and gloom to the world, but actually, how do we overcome some of those challenges? So, adding value. So, you first need to know where you want to be versus where you are now. And if we look at that first question to begin with, so where do you want to be? The way that you get there is by defining a vision. And by vision, I don't mean buzzwords or catchy one line phrases. So I've fallen foul of it myself. Somebody asked me to create a vision, and I think the vision that I came up with was something along the lines of create a continuous learning culture to inspire change. The reason that doesn't work as a vision is because it's too ambiguous, it's too fluffy, it's too open. Any solution that somebody puts on the table could, in theory, map to that vision, being that vague. What we're looking for here is answering, first of all, these 5 questions that will help you define a really good vision. And your vision 100% needs to link back to what your business is trying to achieve. So everybody's vision will look different. 100% it will. And your business outcomes or business KPIs are the where you want to be starting in trying to achieve this. So whose world are you trying to change? And that can't be everyone. I'm sorry, the bearer of bad news, it can't be everyone in your vision. Be more specific. If you need to, have a different vision for different areas of your business. For example, a call center will have very different challenges and what the future looks like compared to maybe complaints, compared to frontline staff, compared to retail staff. So don't be afraid to have a different vision for different areas of the business because they've all got different needs and different KPIs they're trying to achieve. What does their world look like today? What are some of the challenges that they face? And then why is that unacceptable? Why doesn't it work? How will you change their world? This links back to outcomes. What is it that you need to do? What is the change that you want to see within your business or upon the world? And then finally, when will you know that you succeeded? And by answering this question, it makes it really tangible. What defines success? And we speak a lot about in L&D about proving ROI and the challenges that come back with this. Well, there's straight away how you start thinking about it from day one. And then what you do is you take all of these questions and all of the answers that you've got to those. And again, I've completely stolen this structure, but it works really well. And again, this is from Radical Product Thinking. I'll mention it at the end as well because it's again a brilliant book. But basically, the Radical Product Thinking vision statement looks like this. Today, when an identified group wants a described outcome, they have to, what's the current solution? This is unacceptable because here's the shortcomings. We envisage a world where, what's your desired change? What change do you want to see upon the world? We are bringing this about through a basic approach to the solution. What's the general direction? Now, you're not looking for specifics in that basic approach to the solution, but you are looking for a clearer direction in where you want to go. And this will definitely flash out. Okay, by the time you've answered all of those questions, it can become quite a long vision, and that's absolutely fine. The benefit to this, though, is it gives you that clear clarity of where you're wanting to go and what the change you want to see. It helps you have a better conversation with stakeholders and senior leaders to say, here's why it's not working, here's where we need to get to, and here's the approach that we are wanting to take. So it aligns everybody in the business as well. And equally, when something new comes in, you can then decide, is it adding to this vision, and or is it actually detracting from it? So the next part then, so we know where we want to get to. Let's look at where you are now and how you assess that. This is going to look really daunting when this first comes up. This is a capability map or a capability matrix, and I'll walk you through this. So first of all, we've got this circle over here. You absolutely do not need to spend weeks or months doing this capability map. This doesn't need to be an exact science, but you are looking for enough informed information to plot this graph. What you've got is 3 areas of the circle. You've got expected, wanted, and delighted. Expected being it just has to be there. Wanted is kind of those few things that make somebody goes, okay, this is kind of cool. And delighted is the cherry on the top. These are the things that just make people go, wow, that's really cool. That's your innovation kind of area. I call this out now that not everything needs to or should be in wanted or delighted. Some things are absolutely fine to be in expected. Sometimes enough is enough. If it's not going to help you move the dial to your vision and your business metrics, then absolutely fine to leave it where it is. This is what starts to help with focus areas. Then what you've got is around the outside. You can go as specific or broad as you like on this. In the example here, I appreciate the text is probably really small. I should have equated for that, so apologies for that. Around the outside, we've basically got capability areas. So in my example here, we've got things like pre-boarding, onboarding, communications, health and well-being, learning new skills in your business, career development. But you could go really specific. So if you're wanting to improve your digital offering, well, around here you'd have all of those things that relate to purely digital, your platforms. So finding new content, career pathways, that sort of thing. I would highly recommend, first of all, doing an estimate. Where do you think you are in these capability areas, and where do you sit in regards to these circles based off what you know at that moment? You don't have to do an estimate, but the benefit to it is it really opens up any blind spots that you might have to where you think you are to where you need to be. And the reason that is good is because it might open up your eyes to actually an area that you wouldn't have focused on because you thought it was absolutely going swimmingly. But actually, when you do the next stage, opens up to say, you're not performing as well as you are, or I think you are. So next, you want to do some research. You want to do all of that good stuff that we talk about. You want to do your interviews. You want to be doing researches, training needs analysis from a broader level. You want to be doing surveys, looking at performance data and business metrics to help identify and plot this. Like I said, it doesn't need to be an extensive exercise. What you're looking for is enough information to just plot where you believe you are based off that insight. And that's where these second colors will come in. So in this one here, my estimates are the kind of this bluey green color. And after the research, I've plotted the after research where I actually am. What you'll then see is if you then link back to your vision, you know where you want to get to, which is based off the business metrics as well. You can start identifying some core areas that need focus, the ones that need to shift. In this example, I've just used pre-boarding, career development, and leadership skills as the core areas that I need to focus. And then you just put a little arrow. Where do you want to get to? And the way you get there is what we'll look at next. But not everything on here can have your focus. And if we go back to what we were saying earlier about kind of that strategic swelling where you're spreading yourself too much, where you're trying to go wide before you go deep, what we're looking for here is that deep impact, that deeper value that will help move things along quicker. So here I would be picking out these 3 focus areas are the things that are going to help me achieve that vision, and that vision will help me achieve those business metrics. So let's look at that second question. We know where we are, we know where we want to get to, but how do we know what sits in that and those focus areas that will actually add value? We are still really broad and high level. They are still big problems to solve. So the way that I go about this is I use something called opportunity mapping. This is one of my favorite tools in basically being able to map out all of the problems that you have in your focus areas and really identify what I call the value space. This is what will help you in a number of different parts. Have a conversation with stakeholders. Tell the story of how you will move from where you are to where you want to get to. Be able to have better conversations with stakeholders to say no when it's appropriate. So what a opportunity map is basically taking the big problem and breaking that down into the smallest problems possible. I'll show you an example in just a moment of what that looks like. But really, what you're looking at is you'll end up with a gigantic tree. It might not be gigantic, but you're looking for a tree that has some degree of substance to it. And even from a visual point of view, you'll start seeing where the most problems lie. And the other thing to just mention before we look at an example of what an opportunity map looks like and how you build that out is it's not static. Again, it shouldn't be a lengthy exercise. You should have enough information from what you've already done in your capability metrics, in your research, in your data, in your surveys to know some of those problems that are coming out. But it is continuous. It's about continuous discovery. So just because you've created it, don't forget about it for 6 to 12 months. As new problems come in, look to see if it maps onto there. As new opportunities come in, decide, does that need to be added? So let's look at what it looks like. What we've got at the top is we always start off with a business metric. Again, if we go back to one of those challenges where it's really hard sometimes to be able to say, by doing this particular activity or solution or project, this is the business metric that we are going to impact. And this helps with that thinking. This helps link it all back because you have to start with a business metric. If it doesn't map back to a business metric, it doesn't go on your tree because it's not helping the business move forward. Then you've got your L&D outcomes. These are typically your L&D KPIs or OKRs that you're needing to achieve that will always link back to that business metric. And then you've got your opportunities. Now, in this example here, I've just picked out and used a scenario where we've only got one opportunity. But in reality, you'll probably have 2 or 3 of these that would then sit below. And then what you do is you break that down even further. Like I said, you're trying to break this down into the smallest problem that you possibly can. So you've got your parent opportunity that break down into child opportunities. And even within these child opportunities, those will start branching down as well. And if we look at an example of this, I appreciate the text is really small, but the text to a degree isn't too interesting. It's more these high level ones that I want to focus on. And there's a couple of key things that I want to call out with an opportunity that make it really successful. Number one is that there should not be a single solution in this tree. You are purely mapping out the problems within the business that you've identified. The other thing is that all of your opportunities that you break down in this area should all be from the view of the person that it impacts. So you've got terminologies like I feel, I want, I need, but all of it should be written from the perspective of the person that it impacts. So in this example, I don't feel prepared for day one. That starts breaking down into I don't know when or how I'll receive my equipment or software. I'd like to know what to expect on day one to reduce anxiety. I'd like to hit the ground running by learning stuff before I start. All of it is from the view of the individual. And the other thing to call out here is that this helps focus on outcomes. Like I said, there is not a single solution on here at this point. You're purely looking at what is the change that you want to see in the world. And the reason you don't want solutions on here is because let's take a common example. If you start at the top here, reduce the cost spent on new hires by 20%. That's one of the business metrics. Now, sometimes what you then see is, okay, new hire costs, we need to reduce it. Let's change the onboarding. We need to take it from 4 weeks to 2.5 weeks. And that's a real scenario. That was literally what I had to do. And it was, how do we cut stuff out? What isn't needed? How do we reduce that cost? Because they'd already jumped to output. We'd already jumped to save money. Time is money. So therefore, we need to do this exercise. But the L&D outcome that drops below that is, through all of that stuff that we identified earlier on, we lost most attrition, or most attrition was lost from the point of contract and somebody signing that to the first 2 weeks of being in the business. That was where the majority of attrition is in this scenario. So we've been able to pinpoint that down into a more specific L&D outcome. Okay, and we want that to be 10% or less. Suddenly we've got a tangible thing that we can say, yes, this is what we're shooting for. This is the outcome we're trying to achieve. And how we do that is by solving all of these problems. The other things as well, just to call out on this, like I said, this will drill down deeper. So in this example, this is a very high level example that I've pulled out here, because if I'd fleshed this out anymore, it would have been even more impossible to read any of the text. But all of these child solutions, if we take this one example down here in the bottom right, I get thrown into meetings with no context and not enough knowledge. That would start breaking down in itself into further problems to really understand that. Because again, if you try and solve that at that level, there's not enough information there. What meetings was it? What information did they feel that they didn't have? Why was the context missing? And you put that onto the tree as well. Cool. So now that we've got all of these problems out on the table, we can identify kind of key areas. Like I said, this becomes a really strong visual to start showing people, here's where the most problems lie in our business. And I will call out as well that you will identify problems in here that you cannot solve. Somebody mentioned, I can't remember who it was in one of the sessions, that you will identify as part of your analysis things that are not a training problem. It's a comms, it's a HR, it's a team manager issue, it's a operational issue. And that's absolutely fine. You still want those on this tree, because what that allows you to do is bring that storytelling to the front and tell that narrative and work with those other departments to say, hey, we're doing this in this area. These are the problems we're trying to solve. But to truly get to this metric, we need your support in also solving these particular problems. And that's for them to then figure out, how do they solve those? So it's great for also trying to align different departments to actually working towards the same goal as well. Now that we've got all of these challenges on the board, we now finally, eventually, get into the point of how do we solve them. So I want to challenge you, whenever you come up with anything going forward and you're looking at solutions, I want you to come up with a minimum of 3 solutions per challenge you're trying to solve. And the reason for that is because we become biased to our own opinions. If we think back earlier on to one of those product diseases, I can't remember exactly which one it was now, but it's about being locked into your own bias and your own ideas. And a single solution gives you one possibility. So if we go back to that product mindset where it's about continuously adding value to solve the outcome, by having multiple different things, there are more than one way to solve a problem. So you need to put those onto the tables, because that then moves into the next exercise of which solution do you go with and how do you decide the priority order. So in order to do that, you need to look at three key things: desirability, feasibility, and viability. And by looking at these three different areas for all of your different solutions, this is where actually you can start knocking off some ideas because actually it's just not feasible. So let's have a look at some examples. Desirability is about how many people will this solution impact. By solving this, how many people will it impact? Is it high volume, or are we talking about maybe one or two members of staff? Equally, uh, how big will that how much value, sorry, will that add towards where you're trying to get to in those metrics that you're trying to shift? Feasibility: do you actually have the skills, the resource, the time, and the budget to actually deliver that solution? There's been plenty of times where I've come up with this really grand solution and said, yeah, we could do this and stagger it over 3 months, and we could do this course, and then we could do that, and we'd use a bit of nudge theory. And they've gone, yeah, but brilliant, we need this solving in 2 weeks though. And sometimes that just has to be done because there is a fire that needs to be put out. So sometimes you will be forced to put in a solution that isn't necessarily your absolutely desired one because it's more feasible to do that particular one. And that's fine, but just remember that you're taking on what I call vision debt. Sometimes you'll have to put something into the world, but bear in mind that in order to still achieve your strategic vision, you will need to come back and revisit it. Let's solve the problem now, let's add the value, but come back to it later on so that we can do it even better. And viability: is it sustainable? Will it work with new and existing technology and solutions that you have in the business? Does it work with existing content maybe that you've got out in the world? Does that actually need changing? Is there something else that needs to happen, or actually does it clash with something else? And there's a couple of ways that you can score this. A really crude way, again, doesn't need to be an exact science here, but what you're looking for is that quick guidance. This isn't a be all and end all, but you're looking for a quicker way of guiding so you can make decisions quicker rather than spending weeks doing analysis. You could simply put a level of a 1 to 5 score on each of these three areas. So 1 to 5 for desirability, feasibility, viability. Add those up. The highest one is kind of your steer. And that's where you start having those conversations to say what's the priority order. So you don't have to stick to that score, but that's a great way of doing it. And another great way that we actually use at the moment is a RICE scoring mechanism, where you look at reach, impact, confidence, and you divide that by the effort. So it's a bit of a more uh, calculated scoring mechanism because effort can sometimes be a big persuader. If you can still solve the problem in 2 weeks of development or design versus spending 6 weeks, well, that kind of gives you a better score. So therefore, you should be going with that solution, continuously adding value, not having to wait all the time. And the final bit here that I just want to talk on, and then I'll throw it out to see if there's any questions that you want to bring to the table, is communication is a key factor here. One of the major skills of product management, and I think L&D as well, is communication and being people. We always get described as being people, the ones that talk from the viewpoint of our customers, from our learners. We are the voice of our learners. And that's a great thing to be. And that's exactly what product management is. It's about being the voice, telling those stories of why this is a pain point and why we need to solve it. So communicating that story, if you go back to the opportunity map, that's a great way to communicate all of that story and the challenges because it's all built from the view of not just the customers, but the business as well. By solving these problems, the people, it will help you, the business, solve these, and they're working in parallel. So there's a couple of other things I think that we could steal in L&D from the world of product just to really help shift things along. Number one is ceremonies. So these are basically known as sprints, stand-ups, retros in your team. So we talk a lot about being agile in L&D, and I think that gets a bit convoluted sometimes in that agile means having no plans at all, or that you should continuously kind of shift to stuff, have no documentation, and just kind of get on with things as it goes, or jump over here. That's certainly how agile first got introduced to me in the L&D space. Was kind of, yeah, you can jump ship whenever you need to. That's not what it's about. So sprints is about having a set time frame where you have locked in your priorities, typically between 2 to 4 weeks. Now, if you're in the design space, if you've got dedicated people in your team that are dedicated to design and that exploration and uncovering the problems, that's a great point to lock in that for the next 2 weeks. That's your focus. That's what you are doing for the next 2 weeks. Or if you want to do a 4 week sprint, that's what you are doing, and it locks that in. That's your focus, that's your deliverable. And at the end of every sprint, there should be something that is delivered, whether that's a training needs analysis, whether it's the designs, whether it's the end solution, whether that's the analysis of it. But it's a way of breaking it down into smaller chunks without getting locked in into too long term of a strategy. Stand ups are really good as well. In the world of product, we do these every day, but I think that's probably a bit excessive for L&D. But every maybe Monday and a Wednesday, hold a stand up with your team. How are they getting on? What's the progress that you're working on in that sprint and their focus areas? What are the blockers? Um, you know, often I've kind of been working with people, and I've been overseeing projects, and I'll go, great, how's that going in kind of the next team meeting, which is 4 weeks later? And they'll go, oh, I've not heard back from the stakeholder in 2 weeks. I emailed them 2 weeks ago. They've not got back to me. Okay, great. But why didn't you chase that up? And these stand ups are that opportunity for me as the leader to go, how are you getting on? What are your blockers? They raise that and we go, great. How do we resolve that? How do we resolve that so we still achieve that outcome by the end of that sprint? And retros, and I don't think I ever did a retro in L&D. And this is just looking back on that sprint from those last 2 4 weeks and saying, really honestly, what went really well? What made us feel good? What helped us move forward? What were the blockers and what are the future risks? And by bringing that to the table in these retros, it allows the team to continuously learn from each other rather than having to wait for a team meeting, which isn't the place really, I don't think, to be raising these sort of issues about ways of working. A team meeting should be about the team. Here's key things you need to know about the business. How is everybody doing? More of that people stuff, the stuff that impacts their day to day as an employee, not learning from past mistakes or talking about processes and changes and work that's coming up. So shift that to a retro, and it allows that focus moaning to a degree. But also off the back of that, when you get to uh, those challenges that you've just faced, before you've started that next sprint, you go, great, how do we solve that so it doesn't go into the next one? And it allows that, again, continuous learning so you keep getting better as a team. Other thing here about communication is it's okay to say no. Everything you say yes to, you say no to many other things. We know that we are time poor and now becoming a very, once again, resource poor part of the business. People are wanting more for less from L&D. Even more so, I think, now that things are going digital and we've hit a recession. But that's where this kind of gets misconstrued. I think just because you go digital doesn't mean you need less people, because you still need people to design it, to deliver it, evaluate it, keep on top of it, and all of that. But it's okay to say no. And using those tools that I showed you earlier, like the opportunity tree, having that clear vision, showing people the priority areas that you are working towards, allows for a better conversation, that you're not just saying no for the sake of it. You're saying no because we have agreed as a business, these are the priorities and this is where we're wanting to go. There's, of course, always going to be those ones that you've just got to do it, the JFDIs kind of projects, and that's fine. It's just the way it goes. But 90% of your time, you want to be working towards that vision or continuously helping towards that. Which leads me on to that last point of don't be a lone ranger. it's absolutely fine to bring stakeholders along on this journey, get their input into those challenges. As I mentioned earlier, when you're doing that research in the capability matrix, speak to your stakeholders. They might have a completely different view as to some of the challenges that they face versus the actual people that you're trying to support. Get stakeholder and senior leaders aligned and sign off what the priority areas are. Show them that tree, take them on that journey and say, do you agree? And if not, tweak, change, have a good conversation, but lock that in. And then again, that gives you that power to say no because everyone's on that same page. So a lot of what I have spoken about here, don't get me wrong, this is no new thinking from myself. These are by no way things that I have come up with. Everything I've spoken about here has pretty much been stolen from these three books. Three fantastic books. Even in L&D, I would highly recommend reading these. Like I said, people have already been speaking a lot about kind of product mindset and tools already in the last couple of days. And even if you look at job roles as well, there's a lot out there that you start seeing about a product learning manager and a product content manager. And I don't think that's a new buzzword that we're just bringing in, like instructional designer versus learning experience designer. This is actually a very different skill set, I think, a very different uh, objective from those roles. Like I said, though, the correlations, even if you're not in one of those roles, that you will find, and hopefully you found that in this talk here, that the challenges we face, what we're trying to achieve, that we're trying to drive change in a business while still keeping the people as well as the business happy, that is literally product management, and it's literally L&D as well. So I would highly recommend reading these three books. The product book gives you a great overview of just general principles, ways of working. Continuous discovery habits will talk about how you continuously learn, how you do smaller tests rather than having to create big kind of prototypes or the end product, putting it out there, learning and testing and iterating before putting it out. How do you learn quicker without having to just kind of spend all that time and money on that stuff? And radical product thinking, that's about kind of these product diseases that I mentioned, as well as kind of how to get really good at creating a vision. So I'll open it up to the floor, see if there are any questions at all. Um, by all means, as well, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if you want to hear more about me waffling on about a product mindset in L&D. That's mainly what I speak about on my LinkedIn. So see if there are any questions coming in.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Phil. That was super interesting. If you have got any questions, now is the time to drop them in the chat or the main stage Q&A area. I guess one thing I wanted to ask actually was I think L&D typically struggles when it comes to analysis within a business. In my experience, at least, things tend to go one of two ways. One, there's kind of no analysis,
Hmm.
and we're very desperate to kind of get to the let's do the thing, either because we're eager or because the business is very eager. Um, or we kind of get trapped in that kind of forever analyzing stage. We never have enough data. We've never done enough user interviews. We've never done, whatever research we're doing.
Yeah.
How do we draw that line so that we're not spending too long, but that we do have enough?
So I think there's two things to call out that spring to mind. One, we need to get better at working with ambiguity. Like it's okay to not have all the answers, but you need enough that you're confident that you're heading in the right direction. So
Mm.
from an analysis point of view, take surveys, for example. It's very easy to want to have 50, 100 responses on a survey so it becomes more of a tangible kind of analysis at the end of it. But what do you get really from 50 that you maybe couldn't get from just 10? I think you need to get to the point where you've figured out enough of a trend, because even from analysis and doing all of this research and stuff, you're not going to solve all of those problems. As you saw in the opportunity tree, you can't solve all of that in one go. You're going to have to find a focus area. So you're looking enough to pull out the problems, enough of a trend so that you can start building out those trees. So yeah, get comfortable with some ambiguity. but equally, enough is enough sometimes.
It's always challenging, isn't it? Because especially when we talk about kind of we want to be more data driven, and then we want to take from marketing, and then we want to take from the product world.
Yeah.
It sometimes feels like there's always another area for us to be pulling from. But I think, as you say, that ambiguity thing plays a big role in that. But do you think there's a lot of overlap in these areas, or a lot of them talking about the same sort of things, or do you consider them to be quite different?
No, I think they're all similar things really, that. And I don't think we're doing anything that these other areas aren't doing. I think what we can do is refine them. I think
Mm,
that's what we need to learn from them. It's not necessarily adding in another approach or shifting, and this is the right way to do it versus that. But uh, take a TNA, for example. TNA is a prime example where if you just enhance that a little bit by maybe adding in an opportunity tree, or just shifting that TNA to really at the very front of it say what is the outcome you're wanting to see, what's the change, even if you go really specific to that course, right? What is the change that you want to see, and it keeps you focused on that.
mm.
So yeah, I think they're all the same thing, just trying to enhance what we're doing. I mean, even if you look in the product space, a lot of that is kind of about go to market strategies and your market positioning and that sort of stuff. So you know yeah, learn from them. I don't necessarily think we need to adopt them all, though, because it's too much for one person. It really is.
Yeah. So more kind of like iteration on what we already got, as opposed to wiping the slate clean and adopting a whole new way of working, maybe.
Exactly. Yeah, because there are plenty of L&D teams out there making great impact on what they're doing already.
Mm.
I think it's just sharing that best practice, which we're really good at doing anyway, but equally stealing things that are working really well in other industries. Um, I think the marketing one's a good example whereby all of a sudden we think we have to know everything about marketing. And really, if you whittle it down to a nutshell, all you're really wanting to get out of that is how do you show people the value of what you're doing so that they want to go and do it? And how do you make sure that people are aware that this is actually there so it brings about the change? If you whittle it down with the product mindset, it's just about saying, what outcome are we trying to achieve? Rather than focusing on the solutions that get you there, because it's about being not biased. And this is where the agile comes in that you're still trying to achieve this. You're doing a solution. If it's not working, you look at that data, you look at the leading metrics. This is where things like course completion rates can come in handy, because if nobody's doing your course, well, something's going wrong there. Is it they don't know about it? That sort of stuff. But if people are doing it and it's not having the desired impact, well, that's when you go back and say, okay, what's the other solution that we can try to still achieve that outcome? And that's where I think iteration comes in. It doesn't necessarily need to be continuously improving X course or X workshop. It can be, let's just take a different tact. Let's bin that off and try comms instead. Does that have the desired outcome? But you also don't move on until you've actually achieved it.
It's interesting stuff. Interesting point here. Let me pull that up. So I've seen this approach work effectively when external consultants are driving the internal cross-functional teams through the process. Sometimes it's difficult to attain this level of engagement and time commitment when working internally. That's fair enough. We commented on it yesterday. I think it's that magic of, if you're an external contractor, you're suddenly a trusted partner. But if you've
Mm.
worked in the business for 10 years and know it inside and out, you're weirdly not trusted to the same level, or not given the same sort of ability and leverage. Have you
Yeah.
got any thoughts about how to kind of, especially if you're just starting with this stuff, how do you get the business to be like, okay, let's commit to this, let's see what we can do?
Yeah, but this is why I really like these techniques, because they don't need to be an extensive exercise. That capability matrix, for example, if I go back to that,
Hmm.
you could skip out your estimates. You don't have to do that self-analysis, absolutely. So there's one, maybe a couple of hours saved off kind of doing that stuff. A lot of this stuff you'll already know, because we're always getting feedback, training requests. Well, it doesn't take that long to look back and say what requests have we got versus what have we
Hmm.
had? Are there any trends? Business metrics, well, we're always looking at those all the time. So we should have a lot of this information already. Maybe the things that we don't have is maybe kind of the surveys. But this is where I go back to, when is enough enough? just get 10 people to do it. Is there a trend? Brilliant. Learn from it. You plot your data points. Something like this, capability metrics, I wouldn't expect anybody to spend more than a couple of hours on it. It shouldn't be more than that, really. The opportunity map, okay, that's a bit more of an exercise, but you've got all the information there to plot it out. You'll find the first couple of times you do this, the biggest challenge is you trying not to solutionize when doing this and keeping everything from the view of the persona and the problem that you're trying to solve. Once you've done it a couple of times, again, I wouldn't expect more than half a day to be creating an opportunity tree. So is it an exact science? Absolutely not. Are you working off enough information to say to the business, this is why? Yes. And this is where getting comfortable in the ambiguity and the unknown becomes uh, a resilience test, really. And
Mm.
if I think if you could do this stuff, the rest of the unknown, you can figure that out as you go. That's agile, right? Figure it out. Have enough information to get started and make an impact, and then figure out the rest and the unknowns. Or if something comes in that you didn't know about it, deal with it then. How do you now resolve that and overcome that? So that's what I'd recommend for internal teams.
Definitely. So just on that, I guess we not long ago with the team, I implemented kind of a somewhat at sort of agile working basis and things like retros and things like that. And we found that kind of out of the box, right, once a week we do X, Y, and Z just didn't work. It's a great idea. The foundations were there, but it took some iteration to make it work for our team and our organization. And I guess that's the same with all these things, is it's not a case of these straight out of the book or straight out of this presentation will work in every business. It's about taking the core of the idea of each thing and making it serve the purpose you need.
Absolutely. If you take those ceremonies, for example, it would be OTT to do a stand up every single day. Unless you've got a dedicated design team, which is very rare. I think I've only ever had that once in an internal team. It would be OTT, but it's about the principle of that. Even if it was once a week, it's about the principle of making sure that people are on track to achieve what you want to achieve in that period of time. And do they need support in any blockers? And if so, you're giving yourself enough time to act on that before you kind of reach the end and go, we should have delivered this. Um, on that note as well, actually, continuous discovery habits is really good actually at this exact thing about learning fast, learning continuously without having to do extensive insight research and data analysis, without having to create large prototypes or like the end product and then test it and iterate on it. How can you learn faster through like simple things like a couple of questions, a couple of screen grabs, that sort of stuff? So if you are wanting to learn how to get faster but still have enough information, that's the book I'd really recommend.
Fantastic. Well, we've got comments here. Really useful, great stuff. Catherine said actually, using the same language as your stakeholders expect to hear is so important. This has been really useful in understanding some of the terminology that is expected at each stage. Yeah, I think it's whenever we take from other industries, that's always an important phase of getting to grips with a whole new language, right?
Exactly.
Although at least out of words like pedagogy, which is just a ridiculous word, I've always felt.
Yeah,
Um,
and and call them what the hell you like as well. I've just lifted these for because that's what they're called. If you want to, you don't even need to call it a capability matrix, for example. Maybe you just call it a where are we map. It
mm,
could be as simple as that. It could be a vision map. Whatever it was, a focus map. It's whatever's going to resonate with your end people. The key thing though is they've become great visuals to tell the story and take them along that journey rather than saying here's a solution and here's what we want to do. You can
yeah.
take them through that path of saying here's where we need to get to, here's the metrics that it's going to improve, here's the problems, here's why we believe this is right.
Fantastic. Well, we're coming up on the end of time. If there's a burning question that you've got, now is the time to send it in or to reach out to Phil on LinkedIn. He's relatively friendly as long as it's not 3 a.m. or something.
Hey,
Uh,
I'm friendlier than you on LinkedIn.
oh, 100%. Phil responds to messages and everything. Um, awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out to come and talk to us about this today. As always, fascinating stuff. And thank you to everyone who's here as well. Thank you for attending the session. We do have our next session starting in just around 15 minutes. which is what does an intelligent fridge have to do with e-learning? Enter the headless LMS. So we can make sure you've got your fridge with you at the start of the session. Probably not, but we're looking
I'm
forward to
sticking
that
around
one.
for this one. I'm
This,
sticking
I know
around for
that'll
this.
be that. It's not very often you get conversations about fridges
Mm.
at L&D conferences, so it's exciting stuff. Just a quick plug as well. As you know, these events are completely unsponsored. We don't allow selling at the event. All the cost is kind of borne by myself, my business, and the IDT YouTube channel. If you'd like to support, you can join us on Patreon for as little as £1 a month, and we would appreciate any support you can share to help make these events continue into the future. 3 years in, we're going strong, and this is our biggest event ever. So thank you once again, and we shall see you in the next session.